Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on Harnham and Rockborn's latest LinkedIn Live. I'm Amy Foster, the Director of Talent at Rockborn. Our mission at Rockborn is to diversify the data industry. To do that, we connect businesses with diverse and proficient data consultants that we've specially trained ourselves. Many of the consultants that join us come from non-STEM backgrounds. And we see through them that sometimes this can be really rewarding and sometimes this can be quite challenging because they haven't got that STEM background. And that's the topic of today's panel. And I'm joined by a fantastic group of individuals to discuss that, breaking into the data industry without a STEM degree. You all have got such different backgrounds. I'd love for you to introduce yourselves. So can I start with you?
Of course, I'm Mansa Vitorino. I'm Director for Data Operations for a business called ICIS, which is part of RELX Group, and we provide data and analytics on commodities industries.
All right, and I'm Caroline Zimmerman. I am Director of Data Strategy and Consulting at Profusion, which is a boutique data consultancy with clients all across different industries.
And I'm Harleen Teffy. I'm the Global Head of Data and Distribution at BBC News.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Before we kick off, just to let everyone know, we can take questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please do pop it into the chat box and we'll try and answer as many of those as we go through. So shall we start? Shall we get into it? So I guess first question for all of you, and it's the big one. What actually inspired you to get into data in the first place? What kind of pursue that career? Caroline, shall we start with you?
Sure. I think it was winding. I'm guessing that my two co-conspirators here are going to have a similar experience. But I started my career, so I majored in English literature and worked in book publishing as a literary agent for a few years. And I actually decided the one thing I cared about more than books was women in leadership. And that if I cared about women in leadership, I'd better get over my fear of technology and math, because that was going to be a barrier to leadership positions. So I decided to get my MBA. And the idea was to be on the business side of media. And I met a professor there who I did some like different independent study work with. And I kind of like, he was a professor of decision sciences. And I just had a feeling that there was like something in data that linked up to storytelling very well. And that was kind of the link for me, is there's definitely a career to be made on the data side of the media business, and it links up to storytelling. It's like math and stories together. And so that was the connecting thread. And, you know, the way to jump into data was to stay in the media industry, really, because that way I have that sector background, which makes you super valuable as a data professional, is to understand how the business works. So I stayed in media. And I got really lucky. There was this rotational program at a big German media conglomerate called Bertelsmann that owns Penguin Random House and other media companies, where you could do whatever you wanted in their different portfolio companies for a year and a half. So I just got to like upskill myself in data. I'm completely self-taught, apart from my, you know, stats electives in the MBA. And then at the end of that, got offered a role to lead the data team at the music company in that group called Bertelsmann Music Group. And I've been in data ever since.
Wow. Holly?
Yeah, I think I've probably got a really similar kind of background, I would say. So I actually studied law at university. So moving from a legal background, I think it was very much about thinking, what do I want to do? I was doing corporate and commercial. So it was quite an intense sort of side that I was working on for a hedge fund at the time. All of a sudden it was 2009 and it's the financial crisis. So I think that kind of really made me open my eyes up to, what do I actually want to do? Is this the industry I want to be in? Is there something more that I want to be doing? And prior to kind of getting into law, I'd always had a great passion for media and for writing. I actually wanted to do an English degree, which I didn't do. But I think that it just opened my eyes up to think, actually, there's more to life than just thinking, let me just do my job because it's my day job, and what's my actual passion? And I think just being able to sit there and think, okay, I have a passion for data and numbers. I never thought I would have said that. My high school math teacher would probably disagree with me. But I think that just being able to understand and realize it's not just about the math side of things. For me, it was about being inquisitive and really trying to question. I used to question everything. Okay, this is the result, this is the performance, but why? Why are we getting these results? I think that just naturally kind of pushed me into a different direction. And I started my kind of data journey at The Economist. So I still had that little bit of, the crux of it was saying, okay, I'm still in the kind of financial services in terms of the content we produce, but it's a little bit more creative, which is what I really wanted to do. So I think that being able to build up my skills there and move into data roles, I think a big challenge is I had to then go in and start from scratch almost and say, you're going into a new data role. And when I think back, like 20 years ago when I was at university, we didn't really have like an abundance of data roles that we have today. So I think that was a big thing about it as well. But looking at how the data teams kind of evolved over time was really interesting. For me, being at The Economist and seeing data going from one man to like in BI, which was that was literally it, to growing to the kind of expansive teams that we have today. I think it's amazing and remarkable to see how that journey changes. And I think those early initial stages of really seeing how I actually got into it is probably the most exciting part for me. So yeah, I think that kind of shaped my journey into data.
Thank you very much. Ansa?
So I feel like my journey into data was pretty organic. So I studied media and communications at University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, where I'm from. And straight off from university, I started working for Thomson Reuters as a financial markets journalist. So really covering kind of the big companies in Slovenia. I then in 2009 moved to UK and got a job at this place called ICIS, where I was hired originally to cover the German electricity market. So I was really a journalist writing about the prices of various commodities, predominantly electricity. And that's really data-driven journalism, right? So you're talking to a lot of people about where is the price, where is it going, why is it like that? And in order to really write insightful stories, it's not enough for a journalist to pick up the phone and speak to someone on the other side and say, well, why is the price as it is? No one's interested in talking to you like that. But if I dove into the data around the market, so the historical price, the import and export dynamics, the FX rates, then I could go to my market contacts and say, I've spotted something in the data. Could you please tell me what you think about it? Is there a story here? So it was just a much easier way to write really informed pieces, really good content. So as I progressed through the editorial ranks, I eventually became responsible for a data team. And I found out that data team did really manual tasks. So the more I dove into how we stored the data, and at the time ICIS was a publishing business, so we published reports at the end of the day. The more I dove into how we handle data, the more problems I saw. It actually wasn't stored in a way that enabled analysis. So as I was a little bit more senior at the time, it became part of my role to start addressing some of those challenges and actually make it easier for our journalists and our content creators to work with data. And I was very fortunate to be then given the opportunity to shape a data strategy around how we were going to transition that content from purely kind of written more towards data and analytics. And that just opened the door to where I am now, which is really delivering data to our customers where they need it most.
Amazing, thank you. So you've all at some point fallen in love with data and decided this is where you're going. At that point in your career, did you find there were challenges, there were roadblockers, things that made it a little bit tough on that journey?
Absolutely. I think coming into any sort of industry where you don't have an academic backing is always going to be challenging. And there's a big element of like imposter syndrome. You literally walk into a room and think, am I worthy of being here? Should I be here? And I think it's just really important to remember, take a step back and remember, actually, yes, I've worked hard for this. So yes, I may not have that kind of statistics and maths degree behind me, but actually, what do I need to be doing in order to, shape how I move forward in my career? And I think it's important to really understand that passion and that drive to get you there is enough. Yes, of course, there are going to be technical skills. If I want to be a data engineer, I'm going to have to do the training and find the relevant skills that I need. But I think that passion to really push yourself forward and really stepping outside of it and just building upon the confidence. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that you'll face, is looking at how do I overcome being more confident in my own abilities and understanding that I should be here and I should be in this room and actually I am worthy of doing this particular role.
Well, and also I think that the amazing thing about people with non-STEM backgrounds is that they're probably in some ways more easily going to be business outcome focused,
Yeah.
because you're not going to get as distracted in a way by the shiny tech or like, you know, the super technical, like this super advanced algorithm and blah, blah, blah. And yes, it's a challenge, but it's also where your strength is, because probably you're going to be more in that like stakeholder management piece and just the business value conversation. I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is because that's what everyone in data is talking about at the moment. You know, like there was a long time, I think, in the industry where there was a lot of money floating around that could just be thrown at data teams, and in the last couple of years that has stopped being true. And so there's much more emphasis on like, well, what is the ROI of this initiative? And somehow I think people with non-STEM degrees have an advantage. So you have a disadvantage because you don't have the STEM degree, and that can give you imposter syndrome and blah, blah, blah. But it's also the source of your advantage. And I love what Mansa talked about way back when, which is people with humanities degrees are going to be interested in what it means.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, what does this mean? What is the insight? What is the impact of this insight? So yeah, it's like both the source of challenge, but also the source of competitive advantage, I think.
And I think there's something I always try to remember about imposter syndrome. You know, it never goes away.
Yeah.
You can never study yourself to be the smartest person in the room. It's never going to end, right? You can't, no amount of degrees is going to remove that feeling, because there's always going to be someone that has just a little bit more experience in one place or in one subject. So I think you really need to think about, well, what are the things that are true to me? What do I add in this mix? What am I really strong in? What are my strengths? What are my values that are going to drive me through this process? Because everyone has a really unique perspective. And I think in businesses, actually, the most successful businesses really mix that up, right? So they don't have the same people in the same teams, because that always just drives the same result. So that mix is what businesses tend to strive for. And I think having people with diverse backgrounds in data brings that, right? And it is a little bit of, well, so what? Yes, okay, you have lots of data, but why should I care about it?
Yeah, and I think humanities backgrounds are gonna just naturally know how to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the other thing that humanities backgrounds are just non-STEM, right? Like I used to think that to be good at like coding or something, you needed to be good at math. I'm actually not good at math particularly. Like I'm fine. I realized I'm fine. I used to think I was shit. I realized that just by practicing actually is a great way to overcome imposter syndrome. Just like practice a bit every day, much more powerful. 15 minutes a day or half an hour a day gets you so much further than just fits and bursts of like, I'm going to sign up to this giant thing. And, you know, and I've now lost my train of thought.
But it's interesting. Mansa and I were talking just a little bit earlier, where you've got like a data scientist coming in and saying, oh, somebody needs an average, right? And they were saying, do you want the mean, median, or mode? And the business is looking at you saying, I don't care. I want to answer my business question. So what's the value and how am I getting there? And I think coming from humanities backgrounds, you've got the ability to really bridge that gap between saying, I understand the tech side, so I can have that technical conversation with you, but I also understand the business side and how that all ties together. And I think that's really important.
And another thing that's really important, I think, for me is, so I remember when I first came to UK, someone said, well, media and communications, that's like the joke degree. And I thought that was really insulting, because actually what it is, the media and communications, you know, that was like the one that you go and do when you're not smart enough to do something else, which was completely ridiculous, actually, because what it does teach you is to question, to read, it gives you incredibly broad knowledge about how society actually works. And that is directly related to data, because data should be solving problems, right? For the world, for the businesses, for people. And if you don't have an understanding of how it works or how media works, I'm sorry, you're going to be lost, right? So it has a really, really big space in how the world works. Go ahead.
I forgot. You remind me what I was going to say. And I so agree with you, which is that I think humanities backgrounds prepare you to be a very structured person. Mm-hmm. So you may not know all your math and like equations and, you know, solve for X to the same degree. Although I think that anyone can become proficient at coding. Yeah. Anybody, in the same way that anyone can learn French or like a foreign language, anyone can become proficient at coding. You don't need any kind of special background. But I really think that humanities degrees help you structure your thought. And it helps you a lot with then structuring the insight and the recommendation that you're going to give the business, which is ultimately where the value of data work lies. And honestly, being able to structure the story in a PowerPoint is very important, no matter what brand or family of data profession
Yes.
you end up going after.
I completely agree. I honestly, when I hire people in my team, I literally look at things saying, I can teach you the technical skills in these certain areas. Obviously, there are certain parts of engineering and science that you actually need those skills. But a lot of the time I look and think, I can train you on those technical skills. The things I can't train you on is how to be inquisitive, how to want that passion, and how to really want to find the insight in that data and really figure out how to storytell with it. So it's an interesting one.
It's really interesting hearing you all say that. I think one of the things that we've seen quite a lot when we work with businesses and comes up quite a lot is exactly that, where they say, actually, one of the most important things of anyone coming to join our team, they need to be able to break down the complexity and explain it to anyone in the business in a really simple way. And that sounds like a really simple thing, but actually I don't think it does come to everyone really naturally. And I think if you do come from a non-STEM background, you're used to telling stories and building that, and data storytelling is so important. So I think it's fascinating that you've agreed with definitely what we've seen in the market. You all dabbled a little bit on technical skills, so I'd like to look at that a little bit. How did you go about learning some of that technical stuff? And I know you said coding, get to a proficient level, but how did you go about doing that? What resources did you do? Was it daunting? Was it easy? All of that kind of thing.
There's nothing that teaches you faster than just trying to solve a problem, just doing it. I'm convinced. So admitted, I'm not very academic. Went through school perfectly fine, but it's not something that I would want to continue to pursue into masters or PhDs. And I think the main reason is because the school teaches you about a context. But that context, the way it's taught, rarely applies. So I think if you just go and say, oh, I'm going to learn coding, well, unless you're going to have a problem to solve, to practice that coding on, it's all going to go. Just the way it is, in the same way you learn a language, if you're not actually going to go and speak to someone in that foreign language, it's that knowledge is going to disappear. So for me, it was really just about trying to do things. And I personally learned a lot through just the use of Tableau, the software that we were implementing, that taught me about data structures. Actually, what is good data? What does good data look like, and why is it easy to work with such data, or how to structure a calculation so it works programmatically rather than just in my head. And it was purely through practice.
I completely agree. I think when you're working in an area, when you're working kind of on the job and learning, your training's kind of coming naturally, but it means that you're applying it. And I mean, we were speaking earlier about learning languages, and you completely forget when you leave a school setting, because you're not doing it academically anymore. If you're not doing it conversationally for a reason, you forget. And I think data is the same kind of thing. You can go out there and learn, your SQL and Python, but if you're not coming into the workplace and actually utilizing it, I don't think that you're not really going to get to the depth of level of that knowledge that you need, but you're not going to learn how to apply it. And that contextual knowledge is really, really important to know, why is it relevant and important, and how is this going to value the business? And I think that's where you need to start to tie things in. Data professionals do tend to get a little bit stuck into the actual data, but they forget to look at what's the business goal and how do I need to align my data to a business strategy. But on the technical side, I think the data is a really tricky one, because you always will need technical skills. There's always going to be some element of it that you do need to be technical. And there are parts of it, I think, we've probably all done the same, but we've all been back and done little courses and things like that to say, okay, I've done my statistics course and things that I've needed to do because at that point in time it was relevant. I didn't do them all right in the beginning. This has been over the period of 15 years now. And it's because I realized 5 years ago, it was important for me to do one particular course, but looking back 10 years, it may not have been relevant. So I think you've also got to look at and define what area of data that you're wanting to go into, and then look at the types of things you need, not the skills that you need here today, because you've got enough of your in-house training to do what you're doing today. What do you want to be doing in 2 years' time? Those are the skills that you need now to help support you get there on that journey.
I'd also add, I think SQL, some kind of data visualization tool, and Python are the base. I think everyone needs that. I mean, I guess you can get away with just SQL and data viz if you're going to be more on the analyst or maybe data product manager side. But I'd say that's been a really helpful base. And I did, this was in 2015, Coursera's data science certification. It was 10 courses with like a final project. And honestly, it was so not applied. Like it was, and then I had to do my own applications, but it was taught by Johns Hopkins University biostatistics professors and was just so far away from the business realm of things that I was doing. And I have a child now, so I find it a lot harder to learn stuff out of hours. But what I do try and do, and I think is super, super helpful, is because you don't always have in your day job a way to apply what you're learning, especially if you don't already have a data job. Right. And so what I find really helpful is personal projects not personal projects where you're doing a Kaggle data set, but like I'm trained in R and I've been wanting to learn Python for a long time just because it's the lingua franca, right? And ChatGPT is your friend. That was one thing that we have today. It's just your coding tutor in a box. It's amazing. And I've written a program. I just took a week off in 3 days with ChatGPT. I was able to create a program that I wanted to understand how I was spending better. So I wanted to create different budget lines for different types of spend. So I spend this on food and this on my mortgage and this on my child's presents on Amazon and, stuff like this. So I created different budget lines and then tracked my actuals against those different budget lines to understand where I was overspending. And this was like personally really important to me. And so I downloaded the CSVs of my banking statements and wrote the program in Python. And it automatically emails me, like pings me an email when I'm going over budget. And that took, like 4 days to write with ChatGPT's help. And so that's just, I think, a nice example of you don't even have to have the application be at work. I think the important thing is for it to be a real problem that you give a shit about, honestly, and for it to not be like, for it to be practical and kind of fun, and for the output to be something that's going to give you a little high, that like, oh, I can do this now, and like I can track my budget and talk to my husband very coherently about where we can be saving now.
I might need a copy of that. So we've had a question come in from Arif. So what are your responsibilities as a data leader in data? What are the fields in data one can focus? So data engineering, data science, etc. Who would like to go first?
I think this is such a broad one because I think until you've been in the industry itself, you're going to have very different assumptions of what it is. And I also think it's quite different in each organization. So there are there are quite a lot of overlaps in terms of what's defined as a data architect and what roles are or what skills come under an analyst's responsibilities, etc. So I think that you need to, once you're in a role or in an industry, try and explore if you've got the right data leader around you, get a mentor or someone who's a data leader in an organization if it's large enough, and move around a little bit if you can. I encourage it with my team. I encourage them to move around and go and explore different options. I've got analysts within my team who have very, very different skill sets, but they've also got very different areas of where they want to be in the next 5 years. We've got some who are very focused on the sciencey side and some who actually think I prefer the analytical side. So actually that's an area that I want to stay and upskill on. So I think it's just about really understanding, what do each of those mean? We say a data engineer or a data scientist. What is that? And is it something that you have the skill set for and the training for? Don't go and do all the training and the kind of like accreditations in the background first. Really identify, is that something that you're passionate about that you want to be doing? And try and explore, even internships. I had a couple of interns who came in to see if they were passionate about something, if they really like those areas. And there are so many available as well. So I think just try to get into like an industry and then see how you feel and what you think of once you're in.
No, I completely agree. I would also say that there's a great transferability. I don't know if that's a word, but in my team, we've definitely had data analysts who got really interested in making sure that the data is stored correctly, so it's easy to work with. So they're probably more on an engineering track now. We've had business data analysts who have transitioned to data engineering. we have really different. So data science is not in my direct team, but I know that our data scientists work on really diverse range of problems. So it's not always the same in every organization. But I think just being open to learning something, solving some problems, and then seeing actually what is that thing that makes you get out of bed in the morning. What's going to, really spark your passions and your curiosity and your imagination, and just pursue that. I'm convinced that most businesses give those opportunities where they see there's an opportunity for them as well. So probably that's in space or data analytics or data science or data architecture or leadership. It doesn't really matter as long as you're going after the problems and learning through those. I think you're going to find your doors open.
Because these things change all the time. Data scientists were the sexiest. Now it's data engineers. Data engineers are probably the best paid at the moment, but that could change because I think engineers are getting a lot more fire at the moment for okay, well, you're really expensive, and what value am I getting from the work that you're doing apart from just having data? With analytics engineering then being one of the emerging fields, which is somewhere between an analyst and a data engineer. And I think it really is ultimately about do you care more about solving business problems, or do you care more about building the machine, and where are you on that spectrum? And are you, and I think honestly, non-STEM people tend to be more towards the data product management, analyst, storytelling side of things, just because that tends to be where natural strengths and interests lie. And more heavy STEM people tend to then be maybe more on the heavier engineering, go do a PhD in data science for 5, 6, 6 kind of end. And just on the, what responsibilities, I don't know about you guys, but I think mostly in data leadership, your ultimate responsibility is delivering value with data and being the ultimate stakeholder manager in chief to protect the team and make sure they're working on the right things.
One thing we see quite a lot of people join us, they are drawn to the sexier versions of what they perceive in the world of data.
Which would be what?
Well, I think very much engineering and science. I think
the better paid.
Yeah. Understand. But one of the things we were chatting about a little bit earlier is actually we try and cross data because we believe when you come into data, you need to experience and live it a little bit before you make a decision. Would you sort of agree with that, or would you say actually no, just train yourself purely in analytics, purely in engineering, and then get
a leading question?
not at all. Or would you say don't do that if that's what you're doing, or would you say try and stay a little bit more open-minded?
I think particularly when to define, I specifically want to go into this. I think data is so fast-paced, very ever-changing at the moment that skills that were previously required or considered part of a data scientist's role are now considered what an engineer wants to be doing. And I think that if you pigeonhole yourself, I think that you're basically going to be in this situation where in 20 years' time, you're looking back at your career and thinking, did I want to go in this direction? Should I have been a bit more broad? I think it's important to have both the breadth and the depth. If you know that you're very analytical and you definitely want to do that side of it, you're probably going to need to learn a little bit of architecture too, because that's going to tie into it. So I think it's valuable to learn, even if it's just to understand where are the overlaps. And you may have a really strong view of what you want to do, and that's fantastic. But also, you're going to have to collaborate and interact with a lot of other people in the data world within the organization. And being able to understand their side of things is really going to help you when you have to collaborate with them. So I think it's useful to have that knowledge of all sides.
I agree, especially because, again, they're emerging jobs in data all the time. Analytics engineer wasn't even talked about a couple years ago. Data product management, by the way, which is a very non-STEM background friendly, I think, type of profession in the data realm. Used to be called data translators. That is a really well-paid, actually, track, and is maybe even more in demand than data science, I think, at the moment, because there's this new sort of obsession with value, business value creation. Yeah, I would agree, just because it's so changing. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I think what you need to accept is that very few careers are linear. It's they just go, I'm going to be junior this, this senior, I don't know, a vice presidency or whatever, whatever that track might look like. You really need to have, you need to be able to adapt, as you both said, but also just not close your mind and your door to opportunities. I still, I guess I'm reasonably senior in our organization. I still have conversations about what's next in my career and do I go down this route or that route. Eventually, a lot of the skills that a data person will have are very transferable as you get into leadership. Those are like, you need the same kind of soft skills for any kind of leadership position, right? So I would just say don't think that when you're straight out of uni or you're in your first, second position that you've got your whole life mapped out. You do need to leave some space for perhaps a little bit of ambiguity and seeing how things develop.
Also, it just reminds me, I've heard it said a couple of times, hard skills are what get you your foot in the door, but soft skills are what get you promoted. And that's just something to keep in mind.
I'm still in that one. Just quickly, a quick hello to anyone that's just recently joined us. The panel are discussing breaking into the data industry without a steady background or qualification. We have another question. What is a fun fact you found as a data engineer or data person that changed your life?
What does that mean?
I would just say that I didn't necessarily need to have a very mathsy background. Like I wasn't very inclined to go, whilst I was at school, I didn't sit there and think I'm the greatest at mathsy subjects or anything like that. So I was very, very heavily into the humanities, English, history, anything cultural is very much what I was into. And I think that it's about challenging things within your own personal self to say, actually, it's quite interesting to think I do like this and I do enjoy it and I do enjoy working with numbers, and it's not something that I expected. So I think it's just a different side.
The one that comes to mind is, so I guess I left this out just to be succinct about how I got into data, but in between the literary agent career and the MBA, I basically took a year off. And I ended up doing this stint for the startup incubator in Boston at the time. And in like business development-y stuff. And I ended up meeting, it was so random. I think that the truth is just there's so much randomness in careers, right? And their star company from the incubator in the year before I was there was a social media analytics company focused on book market. And so, and they were MIT engineers basically who'd done this social media listening platform. And I was basically going to introduce them to some big book publishing company and to do some of their biz dev. And then I was like, oh, wow, this data stuff is actually really, really cool. And so maybe it's just I don't know if it's a fun fact, but just don't underestimate the role of serendipity when you're just following your nose around what is kind of interesting. And that it will lead you well. Your nose and your gut around like, oh, that sounds sort of fun. I'm going to scratch that itch can just end up really surprising you.
My answer is slightly different. So, as I mentioned, I grew up in Slovenia, and the Slovenian school system is really, really regimented, very strict. And I was a very curious child. So throughout my school system, growing up, it was seen as a really bad thing to be curious. It was kind of associated with nosiness, and I was just essentially just asking far too many questions. And then about a year ago, I was doing some research on how to, so I'm driving this literacy data culture program in our organization, and I was trying to appeal to people who would say, well, I don't like data because I don't like maths. Well, guess what? Me too. But I was trying to appeal to people, and we really stumbled. Curiosity is one of our guiding values actually at ICIS, and I was doing some research on curiosity. And what I found was that satisfying curiosity releases dopamine. So in terms of like, I wouldn't say that it's life changing, But I thought it was really interesting because throughout my education, I had to fight against this instinct of being curious. And now it's actually what is, as I mentioned, one of our guiding values and what I actually thrive on. I love discovering new things and I love to inspire other people to do the same thing. So just that kind of change perception in terms of what curiosity is, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. That's my one.
Well, thank you very much. I have a question for you around challenge. In your career to date, what would you say has been the most challenging piece?
I would probably say being able to take the data, tell the technical side, sometimes it's okay to not be too technical, and then tell the business side, sometimes you need more data, and trying to really bridge that gap. And I know we spoke about like data translators and the kind of product side of things, but I think that's something that I found the most challenging, to show how much is too much data and how much is kind of, how much of that data. There's always going to be an abundance of data. I mean, I'm in an organization like the BBC, you've got more data than you actually need. What's the value in that data and what are you trying to gain from it? And I know that there's a lot of things around people saying, oh, it's about insights and things like that. And somebody stopped and asked me once, what is an insight? And I was like, that is a really good question. And it's just, it literally stops you in your tracks, and you have to get back to the bare basics and say, how are you going to get a value from this? If it is from a technical perspective, that's great. But actually, as a leader, you're trying to drive some change in the business, and you need to provide them with an action or a potential action. They can say no, but provide them with a potential solution as to what they could be doing to drive better change or to go in the right direction for their business. And I think that's something that I found challenging, trying to explain on different sides of the spectrum. Being from humanities, I think you've almost we discussed earlier, you've got the ability to look at both sides a little bit better. So I'm not so narrow-minded on a data side and saying everything has to be technical to be set. And if it's not all done perfectly, there's a problem. I can kind of see what value you can get from that and how that relays to the business. And I think the challenge that I found is trying to relay that information to both sides of it is quite a challenge.
I would add, kind of along those lines actually, that data issues bring up all the dirty laundry in organizations. And so you think that you're doing data stuff, but you end up doing a lot of organizational, like overcoming organizational challenges. Data quality issues are really just process issues and communication issues in disguise. It's different parts of the business not talking to each other or not being aligned. And really, when you get into data, you are the most cross-functional function, because it touches everything, even more than finance, right? You just end up being in like the supply chain and procurement side of things, and the sales and marketing side, and the HR side, and blah, blah, blah. And so it just brings up, you end up just holding a lot of organizational tension as the data team, and negotiating that organizational tension with often not that much power to change those things. And so I'd say the greatest challenge is around how much informal influence you have to exercise, which is why non-STEM backgrounds are great preparation for like data leadership roles, right? Because a lot of it is going to be around, just sales, trying to sell your vision, but also hear the vision of others. And what I would say is I would highly recommend to anyone a 2-year stint in consulting. Absolutely brilliant preparation for data leadership roles of any kind, if that's something that you're considering, because it forces you to do the stakeholder management piece at a different level than most internal roles. That's been my experience. So yeah, highly recommend consultancy for a couple of years to anyone thinking of a career in senior, aspiring to a senior role in data.
I agree with you. I would just call it prioritization is the biggest challenge, because as you mentioned, data's everywhere, and usually it's not in the best state, right? It has either been neglected or collected, almost unconsciously. And there's a whole host of challenges in trying to turn it into value. And so prioritizing what to go for first, for me, has been is a consistent challenge, actually, because you always have, you're never done. There's never an organization that's done with its data, and it's, it's consistently delivering value. It doesn't need to be touched again because it's perfect. It doesn't happen. So constantly managing stakeholders, explaining, why are we going after this thing? Why not that other thing that means something more to a specific person? I remember when we first launched our data strategy, I was completely disappointed to have our data scientists, right? Because it wasn't going to be it. It was a small step towards the it. So I think that constant stakeholder management, constantly trying to prove, so find and then prove and deliver value when you have so many opinions in the room is a continuous challenge.
Clearly, our greatest challenge is not learning SQL.
I was really interested to see if that was going to be the answer, which obviously it wasn't. It's again, it's the non-technical. Thank you. We've had another question come in from Carmen. Do you have any tips on ways to overcome or cope with imposter syndrome?
No, I seriously still. I think you were saying as well. I just think it's an ongoing struggle, but honestly, even our head of data engineering struggles with it, and he's absolutely brilliant at like the technical piece. And I also think that there's a lot of money to be made by tech vendors on making you feel like you don't know the next thing, excuse me. And I guess tips, I still feel like right now I am dual pursuing like more technical skill, but also becoming more commercial. Mm-hmm. And I don't know which, and I guess one of the things is like, it's okay to pick one. It's okay for a couple of years. I'm in consultancy. It kind of makes sense for me to become a bit more commercial and pursue that. And then I can come back to the technical skills later. And I guess that the main thing is, am I learning? Do I feel like I'm learning and progressing in the general direction of the skills that I think are valuable? But honestly, I don't know if this is helpful, but as you said, it never does go away. And I more just learn to coexist with it. That's my main thing, is I'm just like, yeah, this is just always going to exist.
I do think it gets easier as you get older.
Yeah.
Because you become more confident in who you are. And I think the only way to cope with imposter syndrome is to just really recognize who you are, what your strengths are, and what you bring to the table, and then amplify that. Just be led by who you are. So at ICS, we do lots of kind of senior leadership development, and we really emphasize values. So we tend to encourage people to align to a value. So mine is authenticity. And I find that value guides me through decisions, through how I tackle challenges, to how I learned, how I deliver things, or how I try to convince people, to invest in data. But it's because it's true to myself. I know that there are better. I'm never the smartest engineer, analyst, data scientist, or data person in the room. So I have to lead with what is true to myself, to the strengths that I have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think imposter syndrome is ever going to go. And I don't necessarily think it's just on the technical side. I think coming from a non-STEM background, it's naturally going to be that way because you feel, I don't necessarily have the academic backing. But even if we take it away from the STEM side, very early on in my leadership career, because as you move up towards the leadership, you do less of the day-to-day technical side of things. That's just naturally how it progresses. And very early on in my leadership, I actually joined a panel, and it's kind of like a leadership panel of executives, and I was the only female. Again, imposter syndrome kicks in, not because it's a technical thing, it's because, oh my goodness, should I be here? I'm relatively young and a woman. Should I be in this room? And you have to, well, it's not the case anymore. 5 years later, we've progressed and it's a half and half mix. But you have to really understand that imposter syndrome is exactly what Margaret said, that it's about confidence and about overcoming that confidence and taking the time to say, what value am I adding to this setting right here? And recognizing that you should be in that room. There is a seat at the table for you. And I don't think that people should look at things and say, what are the negatives that I'm having that are causing this imposter syndrome? Look at the positives and think about how you can step away from that and say, this is what I am bringing.
I completely agree with you. Particularly, I think for me personally on the age thing, I think as you start to get a bit older, your priorities change, the way you view life changes. So you still have imposter syndrome. I think you recognize it earlier on in yourself, and then I can put it in a little box and say, okay, it's there, and I know, and I need to work on that. But actually, this is bigger, and this is something I need to do.
Also,
instead.
that everyone has it. Like
Yeah.
basically,
Yes.
100%
We talk
of
about it
people
so
feel the
much
same
more
way.
now,
Yeah.
which is really good. So we all know we're suffering a little bit. So we've had another question coming from Meg. What do you think employers or the data industry need to do to encourage more non-STEM graduates into the data field? Is there still a form of snobbery at play?
I love this question.
Yeah.
I think I would say yes, there is still that kind of snobbery in this field, but I think it will have to go away. Data is not an exclusive club, just isn't. I think we will have to rethink what a career in data actually is, because if I look at our organization, I can't tell you who doesn't work with data or in data. Everyone's roles at ICIS are data roles. I think we need to make it more accessible. It has to become more general and not an exclusive club. I'm really passionate about ensuring that actually no one feels alienated by data or by maths, because it doesn't come into the equation. You'll excuse the
And
pun.
also, I'm just to maybe reformulate the word snobbery, right? I think it's just more still a misunderstanding, and this is definitely true of employers, that technical skills are the principal technical skills that you need to deliver value with data. That like the more advanced the technical skills of the people on your team, the more successful you will be. Totally not true. And really what you need for successful, you need a lot of multidisciplinary, you said it before, right? Like actually multidisciplinary data teams tend to deliver better outcomes than like pure tech. And you need a great data product manager. You need subject matter experts. You need a project or just someone organizing the work, prioritizing and organizing the work, and who's responsible for the value case. And again, all those things probably more natural to be great at in a non-STEM grad. And those are the things that are most missing in data teams today. What I would say is I don't think that the market is necessarily educated about that. And so you still see most job descriptions being very heavily saying we need these. I do think that's starting to change though. And that's starting to change because there isn't as much money floating around. And so there's more and more emphasis on, well, what's the value of the
I
investment?
also think now that we're moving into like a world of automation, so there's a lot more automation and generative AI and things like that going on. And the more that we do that, the more time and space that we have to look at those insights and how we're actually going to gain value from them. I think that's where you need to have the non-STEM backgrounds of saying, I'm able to storytell with this data. I'm able to really like resonate with what that end user wants. So I think that there is a lot of space for various different people within the data space. Just naturally, I think it's evolving in that way.
Well, totally. And, we see it all the time. Like at my consultancy, one of the things we often get brought in to fix is a bunch of data things. So basically like data models, data pipelines, data science models, propensity models, churn models that the company invested a lot of money into making and then didn't get adopted and went nowhere. And a lot of how we fix that is with the humanities stuff, which is, have you done your user research? Have you done your UX research? Have you deeply understood not just requirements, quote unquote? Like I've heard there's this really interesting person I'd encourage you all to follow called Brian T. O'Neill, who calls himself the UX for data products guy. Mm-hmm. And he talks about requirements being friendly lies. Because I'm pretty sure we've all been here, like you build something according to requirements, exact requirements, and could get like 0 adoption, right? And that's exactly what you were asked for. And there's a real art, and it's the art of humanities, right? Of like communication, of uncovering hidden user needs, and really doing almost like ethnographic observation of the people that you're building for so that you can build the right thing. And like, those are also, again, right? There's so many emerging like humanities like data things because all this stuff gets built for like millions and just sits there in what they call dashboard graveyards or like whatever you want to call them. And it is those humanities skills that allow you to bridge the gap between the data thing, that like the math thing, and a full solution that's going to solve someone's problem and actually get adopted.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think, in the UK over the last 3 years, the government have massively pushed, the media around getting more people into STEM, which is great, particularly women, which is really important. But I wonder sometimes if that's pushed things in a slightly different direction, where people then, it adds to the myth for data that if you haven't done STEM, you can't get into data. And I think other industries have slightly seen that as well. So I think we need to do more as businesses to be more responsible for people earlier on, not just when they turn up on our front door for the very first time. So actually engaging more with schools and colleges. Conversations like this are really important. Someone having a role model going, oh, hang on, that's how Holly got into this. I'm kind of heading in that direction, so I could end up there. I think that's really important. We need to do a lot more. But I think every industry has its myths of how you get there. But I personally find there isn't one. There is no industry that has one route. There are multiple routes to all. So I've got probably one. We've got time probably for one final question that I'd love to ask you, and that's an advice question, really. What advice do you have for a non-STEM grad looking to get into data? What would you say to them?
I guess my main thing, as you mentioned about the role model thing, my main thing would be get yourself a mentor. It could be somebody within your organization, it could be somebody within the industry. There are a lot of different internships and things like that available, but have a mentor who can really help guide you through your journey. It could be, a university professor or anybody that is going to help guide you on your journey and give you the advice that you need as to what the realities of working in data is actually like, and what it's and what it's taught them, and what value it can bring to you. I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've already mentioned the one of picking a passion project, like, learn technical skills through something applied, even if the application is something just in your own life, a real problem to solve. And then the other one is LinkedIn is definitely your friend. It is such an amazing source of knowledge. There are so many interesting people to follow. I'd be happy as a follow-up to give a list of recommended people to
Amazing.
follow. And I think that's it. Oh, and write on LinkedIn. Write about your journey, share about your journey. I know so many people who've been hired and discovered because basically they blogged on LinkedIn about what they were learning. And it just leads to a lot of, that's how I met Harleen, for example. It just leads to serendipity. Not forced serendipity, but you're just inviting serendipitous moments to happen by putting yourself out there. And if posting feels like too much, just start by commenting on what people are saying. It's a vast and interesting world of information out there in the dataverse of LinkedIn.
I would just piggyback on that and say there's a power in community. And I feel actually data, we were talking a little bit about it not being an exclusive club, but it does have an incredibly strong community. So one of the really big, advantages to me building a career in data was that kind of Tableau community where we met.
Yeah.
And that has really, that gives you a feeling of belonging, of space, of a safe space where you learn, where you find how other people have tackled problems, and really build that network. I think that's really powerful, and I think the data community does have that, so do explore it.
And if you're non-STEM, I would bet that you're good at community or interested in community and connection.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. It's been incredibly insightful, a lot of food for thought, certainly. And thank you everyone for your questions and for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you soon on our next LinkedIn Live.